The rain began not as a drizzle, but as a declaration of war. It hammered against the plate glass window of my shop, each drop a tiny fist against my 5 years of quiet, unraveling desperation. Outside, the city had surrendered. Cars hissed through flooded streets, their headlights smearing the gray afternoon into a watercolor of defeat. My shop, the Haven, was an island of stagnant air and the low hum of a struggling air conditioner. I had named it with an irony I could only appreciate now, sitting alone, polishing a glass that had no customer to serve. 5 years. 5 years since I had packed my things, ignored my father's lecture on the foolishness of a woman wanting a business instead of a husband, and poured every cent I had into this space. It was my act of defiance, my anchor. And now that anchor was dragging me down. I was tracing the rim of the glass when I saw her. A flicker of movement in a world that had gone still. She was walking, not running, through the downpour, as if the water was something to be endured, not escaped. Her clothes, a thin cotton shirt and jeans, were a second skin of rainwater. Her canvas sneakers squelched in the overflowing gutter. But it was her face that held me. It was blank, a canvas wiped clean of every readable emotion, except for her eyes. They were hollowed out, staring at nothing. Her shoulders shook violently, the only part of her that seemed to register the biting cold. She clutched a worn-out backpack to her chest like a shield. Something in me, a dormant instinct I hadn't felt in years, stirred. It was the recognition of a familiar kind of drowning. Before I could reason with myself, before I could list all the reasons a woman alone in a city shouldn't invite trouble in, I was on my feet. I grabbed the big black umbrella I kept by the door, the one meant for two, and pushed my way out into the assault of the storm. The water was instantly chilling, soaking through my cardigan. I reached her in a few long strides, tilting the umbrella to cover her completely. My own shoulder took the full force of the rain. She flinched, a sharp, terrified movement, and her head snapped up. Her eyes, wide and guarded, fixed on mine. They were the color of moss after a fire. For a moment, we just stood there, the roar of the rain a wall around us. I forced a smile, feeling the cold water drip down my neck. "It's coming down too hard," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "If you don't mind, you can wait it out in my shop. I can make you something hot to drink." She stared at me, her gaze sweeping over my face, searching for the catch, the angle. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the straps of her backpack. I saw the hesitation warring with the exhaustion in her features. I didn't push. I just held the umbrella steady, a silent offer of safety. After a long, waterlogged minute, she gave a single, jerky nod. I guided her back toward the warm light of the Haven, her silence as heavy as the storm-soaked air. Inside, the bell above the door chimed a cheerful, ridiculous welcome. She stood dripping on the old wooden floorboards, a small puddle forming at her feet. She looked like a shipwrecked sailor washed into a quiet cove, uncertain if the land was safe. I handed her a thick, clean towel from the back. "Here," I said softly. "Dry off." While she stood hesitantly by the door, toweling her hair, I went behind the small counter and put a kettle on the hot plate. The familiar ritual of making tea was grounding. I grated fresh ginger into a mug, the spicy scent cutting through the damp chill. I didn't ask her name or where she was going. The questions felt like an intrusion, a demand for a story she clearly wasn't ready to tell. I placed the steaming mug on a small table near the window. "Ginger tea. It's good for the cold." She finally moved, her soaked sneakers leaving damp footprints on the floor. She sat down, cradling the mug in both hands as if it were a source of life. The rigid, shivering tension in her shoulders began to ease. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the gurgle of the heater and the steady drumming of the rain. When she finally spoke, her voice was raspy, as if it had been locked away for weeks. They were going to make me marry him. The words hung in the air between us, stark and heavy. I couldn't. I just ran. She told me in broken pieces. A family that saw her as a transaction. A man she'd never met who was meant to be her future. She'd saved for months, packed a single suitcase, and fled to this city with a vague plan of disappearing. But her suitcase, containing all her savings and documents, had been stolen at the bus station. All she had left was in the backpack she was still clutching. I looked at her, at the raw desperation in her eyes, and I saw a reflection of my younger self. Not her exact circumstances, but the feeling, the suffocating sense of having your life charted for you by people who refused to see who you really were. My father's dismissive wave of the hand. This little shop is a nice hobby, Christina, but it's time to be serious. The back room, I said, the words coming out before I'd fully formed the thought. It's just for storage. There's a cot. It's not much, but it's dry and it's safe. I saw her eyes widen, a flicker of disbelief. You can stay here. For a while. If you want, you can help me around the shop. Keep the inventory, clean up. I can't pay much, but I can cover your food and a small wage. Her hand, holding the mug, shook so hard that tea sloshed over the rim. A single tear traced a path down her cheek and fell into the cup. She didn't say thank you right away. She just stared at me, a long, searching look that felt more profound than any words of gratitude. Diane, she whispered finally. My name is Diane. And just like that, she had a place. And my quiet, lonely island for one suddenly had a new inhabitant. Diane moved with the quiet efficiency of a ghost. She folded herself into the rhythm of the shop so seamlessly it was as if a space had always been waiting for her. The back room, once a chaotic jumble of boxes and forgotten stock, became a model of order. The shop floor, which I usually tidied in bursts of reluctant energy, was now perpetually immaculate. She learned the inventory in 2 days, her memory for suppliers and product codes eerily precise. Her presence was a balm and, strangely, a source of a new, low-grade anxiety. She worked with a frantic, focused energy, as if she were trying to pay back a debt that grew larger with every passing hour. She anticipated my needs before I voiced them, a fresh cup of coffee on the counter in the morning, the day's deliveries already unpacked and shelved, the sales floor rearranged to look more inviting. I was grateful, truly. Business was still slow, but the shop felt more alive. Yet, a part of me felt like I was losing my grip on the one thing that was entirely mine. She never overstepped, but her competence was a quiet, unspoken rebuke of my own years of just scraping by. Then came the phone calls. She was discreet, always stepping into the back room or the alley behind the shop, her voice a low, urgent murmur. I'd catch snippets through the closed door, clipped phrases that made no sense. The manifest is correct. Confirm the drop. No delays. The first time, I dismissed it. She had a life before me, friends, contacts. But it became a pattern. A certain time each afternoon, her phone would vibrate, and she would disappear, her expression hardening into a mask of sharp, unreadable focus. When she returned, she'd be paler, her hands clenched at her sides for a moment before she forced herself to relax and pick up a dust rag. One evening, I walked into the back room without knocking. She was hunched over a small, battered notebook, her phone pressed to her ear. She saw me and snapped the notebook shut, her body going rigid. She ended the call abruptly. Everything okay? I asked, trying to sound casual. Fine, she said, her voice tight. She tucked the notebook into her backpack. Just a friend. But her eyes told a different story. They were guarded, closed off. In that moment, the space between us, which had been filled with a fragile, unspoken understanding, suddenly yawned into a chasm. She was a stranger I had let into my life, and I realized, with a sudden, sharp pang of fear, that I knew nothing about her at all. The shop, my haven, no longer felt entirely safe. The memory surfaced on a Tuesday, triggered by the scent of wood polish and old paper. I was watching Diane alphabetize a shelf of vintage books I'd been meaning to sort for years. Her focus was absolute, her movements precise. She was building order out of my chaos, and it reminded me of the day I decided to create this place. I was 21, standing in my father's study. The room smelled of leather and his disapproval. I had just told him I was taking my inheritance from my grandmother and leasing a commercial space. I laid out my business plan, my voice steady if a little tight. He didn't even look at it. He leaned back in his leather chair, a portrait of condescending authority. Christina, a woman's security isn't in a ledger book. It's in a good marriage. This little hobby of yours is sweet, but it's a fantasy. You'll run out of money, and then you'll see that I was right. His words weren't meant to be cruel. That was the worst part. To him, they were a simple statement of fact, as unchangeable as gravity. My ambition wasn't real. My dream was a little hobby. I was a daughter to be married off, not a person with a vision. I didn't argue. I just stood up, the untouched business plan feeling heavy in my hands. I'm not asking for your permission, I said and walked out. The Haven wasn't just a shop, it was my rebuttal. Every day I kept the doors open was a day I proved him wrong. It was my lonely, exhausting, and deeply personal war. Watching Diane now, I saw that same war in her. It was in the fierce set of her jaw as she negotiated with the delivery driver, in the relentless energy she poured into tasks no one had asked her to do. She wasn't just working for her keep, she was fighting for her own existence, proving to some invisible judge that she was worthy of the space she occupied. We were two women forged in the fires of familial dismissal, fighting different battles on the same ground. That realization should have brought me closer to her. Instead, it fed my growing fear. I knew what that kind of desperation felt like. I knew the corners it could drive you to cut, the reckless risks it could force you to take. I saw my own past defiance reflected in her, but it was distorted, shrouded in the mystery of her secret calls and her hidden notebook. And I began to wonder what her rebellion looked like, and if I had foolishly made my own a casualty of hers. It started with $20. At the end of a slow Wednesday, I counted the cash drawer. It was a ritual, the numbers a familiar, often disappointing litany. But that day, the total was off. $20 over. I counted again, then a third time. I checked the credit card receipts against the register tape. There was no mistake. An extra $20 bill was sitting there, crisp and unaccounted for. Did we get a big tip today? I asked Diane, who was sweeping the floor. She paused, a slight frown on her face. Not that I remember. A woman left $1 in the jar. That's it. She looked at the bill in my hand, her expression unreadable. I told myself it was a fluke. A customer who'd miscounted their change and hadn't noticed. I put the bill aside, a small, green question mark. But a few days later, it was $50. The week after that, $100. Always cash. Always more than our sales could possibly account for. A cold knot of dread coiled tight in my stomach. The city had taught me a harsh kind of logic. Nothing comes from nothing. The extra money wasn't a blessing. It was a symptom. My mind, a traitorous thing, started constructing scenarios, each one darker than the last. Was she selling things from the back? Skimming from a previous job and hiding the cash here? Was my shop being used as a drop point for something I couldn't even bear to imagine? The trust one thought we'd been building felt thin and fragile, like old lace. I started watching her. I observed the way she handled cash, her movements quick and sure. I noted the customers she spoke to, searching for a sign, a glance that was held too long, a hushed exchange. I found nothing. She was a model of quiet professionalism. This only made it worse. The dissonance between her diligent, helpful presence and the undeniable evidence in the cash drawer created a constant, thrumming anxiety that settled like lead in my chest. The Haven, my sanctuary, now felt compromised. Every chime of the bell, at the door, made me jump. Every time she slipped into the back room to take a call, my imagination painted a grim picture of the person on the other end. The money felt tainted, a silent accusation sitting in my cash box, and the woman I had taken in from the rain was becoming a stranger again, one who held a secret I was now terrified to uncover. The notebook became an obsession. I knew where she kept it, tucked into a side pocket of the backpack she never let out of her sight. I'd see her making entries in it during quiet moments, her pen flying across the page in a tight, precise script. It was a log of everything, I assumed, her entire secret life contained within its worn cardboard covers. My chance came on a Thursday afternoon. A delivery of heavy ceramic planters arrived, and I asked Diane if she could help the driver bring them in from the alley. She left her backpack on the stool behind the counter. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew it was a violation, a betrayal of the sanctuary I had offered her. But the fear was stronger than the guilt. My hands shook as I unzipped the pocket. The notebook was thin, its pages filled with columns of numbers and strange acronyms. SKU, COGS, ASP. They meant nothing to me. But it was the other entries that made my blood run cold. There were names I didn't recognize next to dollar amounts. And then, a series of phrases, circled and underlined. Secure transport. Package integrity confirmed. Finalized payment upon receipt. I snapped it shut just as the back door opened. My face felt flushed, my guilt a palpable heat. Diane and the driver came in, their arms full of boxes. She glanced at the counter, at her bag, then at me. Her eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, a silent question passing between us before she turned her attention back to the delivery. That night, after we closed, I stayed late, pretending to work on the accounts. From the main floor, I could hear her in the back room. Her voice was a low, tense whisper, the words indistinct but the tone urgent. I crept closer to the door, my ear pressed against the cool wood. "No, the shipment has to be perfect," I heard her say. "The margins are too tight for errors. I'll handle the distribution myself. Just make sure the inventory is ready by Monday." Shipment, distribution, inventory. The words from the notebook collided with the secretive phone call. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't family. This was business. Clandestine, illegal business. My mind spun into a free fall. Was she moving contraband? Stolen goods? Was my tiny, struggling shop now the hub of a criminal operation? The polished floors and carefully arranged shelves seemed like a flimsy stage set, hiding a dark reality I had naively welcomed through my front door. The decision was made in the sleepless hours of a long night, fueled by cold coffee and colder fear. I could no longer live with the ambiguity. I had to protect myself, my business, my legacy, no matter how small it was. I had to create a boundary. The next morning, before Diane was awake, I logged into the security company's website. My fingers felt clumsy and alien as I typed in the command to change the keypad code for the front door. The old code had been simple, a birthday. The new one was a random sequence of numbers, meaningless and impersonal. I did the same for the small safe where I kept the bulk of the cash. It was a small, silent act of eviction. She wouldn't be locked out, but she would know, the moment her fingers punched in the familiar numbers and the door refused to yield, that she was no longer trusted. She was an employee, an outsider, not a partner in this space. I was at the counter when she came out from the back room, ready to start the day. I watched her, my stomach churning with a toxic mix of self-righteousness and gnawing shame. She went to the door to flip the open sign, a morning ritual she had adopted. As she turned back, she paused, her eyes on the keypad. I saw the subtle shift in her expression, the almost imperceptible frown as she processed the change. She didn't try the old code. She didn't have to. She looked over at me, and in her gaze, I saw not confusion or anger, but a flicker of deep, profound hurt. A quiet resignation. She understood immediately. The air in the shop changed. The easy camaraderie we had developed vanished, replaced by a thick, suffocating formality. We moved around each other with careful, deliberate steps, our conversations clipped and functional. Did the morning paper arrive? I've restocked the candles. The silence between sentences was deafening. Every time I used the new code, I felt a fresh wave of guilt. It was a constant, numerical reminder of my suspicion. I had taken the key to our shared home and kept it for myself. I had reinforced the lock on my own life, but in doing so, I had locked her out, and the loneliness that returned was more acute than any I had felt before she arrived. The breaking point arrived on a Friday evening, cloaked in the scent of rain-soaked asphalt from a passing shower. We were closing up, the silence between us stretched thin and sharp. Diane was in the back, organizing a new shipment of soaps, when her phone buzzed. I saw her glance at the screen, her face pale in the dim light. She answered, her voice so low it was barely a whisper. "It's done," she said. "The transfer is complete." That was it. Transfer. The word landed in my mind like a lead weight, solid and damning. I walked to the doorway of the back room, blocking her exit. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my voice, when it came out, was chillingly calm. "I can't do this anymore, Diane." She ended the call without saying goodbye, her eyes locked on mine. She stood perfectly still, surrounded by boxes of inventory she had so meticulously arranged. "I need you to tell me what's going on," I said, my voice level. "I need you to tell me where the money is coming from, and who you're talking to on the phone every day. I gave you a place to stay. I trusted you. And I think you're using my shop, my life, for something illegal." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and irrevocable. I watched her face for a reaction, expecting denial, anger, maybe even fear. Instead, a wave of exhaustion washed over her features. It was the look of someone who had been running a marathon, only to be tripped right before the finish line. She didn't speak for a long moment. She just looked at me, and her gaze was so full of weary disappointment that I felt my own conviction begin to fray. "The money," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "You want to know about the money?" She walked past me, not waiting for an answer. She went to the counter, pulled her laptop from her backpack, and flipped it open. The screen flared to life, casting a cool blue light on her tired face. I was going to wait, she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to show you that this place wasn't just surviving, that it could be more. She turned the laptop to face me. My breath caught in my throat. On the screen wasn't a bank transfer or a criminal ledger. It was a website. A beautiful, professional, fully functioning e-commerce website. And at the top, in elegant script, was the name, The Haven. I stared at the screen, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. It wasn't just a website, it was a digital version of my shop, but better. The photography was stunning, each product shot in soft, natural light, making my simple wares look like artisanal treasures. There were categories, a seamless checkout system, and a blog section with posts titled The Art of a Quiet Morning and Finding Sanctuary in Small Things. Diane clicked a tab labeled Orders. A list populated the screen, dozens of them, each with a name, an address, and a status marked shipped. I recognized the names of some of my regular customers, but most were strangers from neighborhoods across the city, even from other states. Every time a cash surplus appeared, it was because an online order came through for local pickup, she explained, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. The customer would pay online and I'd put the cash they used in the shop into the register and take out the exact amount to package their order. I was keeping the books balanced, to the dollar. She navigated to another page, a social media dashboard. An Instagram account for The Haven, with thousands of followers. There were pictures of the shop, of me arranging flowers, of sunlight hitting a stack of books. Photos she must have taken on her phone when I wasn't looking. Each post had hundreds of likes and comments filled with praise. My favorite spot in the city. Can't wait to order again. The world tilted beneath my feet. The secret calls, the hushed tones, the coded notebook, every piece of evidence I had meticulously collected and woven into a narrative of crime and betrayal reassembled itself into a new picture. A picture of staggering, secret effort. Of a quiet, relentless campaign to save my business. My suspicion was a house of cards, and she had just blown it away with a single, undeniable truth. I felt the heat of a deep, profound shame creep up my neck. I had been so busy looking for a monster that I had failed to see the architect working in the shadows. The notebook, I whispered, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. And the phone calls, the shipments. Diane let out a long, slow breath. Before Io left, she said, choosing her words carefully, I worked in logistics for a large online retailer. My job was supply chain management, sourcing, pricing, negotiating with vendors. She opened a spreadsheet on her laptop. It was a dizzying grid of names, numbers, and percentages. My suppliers were on the list. Your overhead is too high, Christina, she said, her voice softening slightly, taking on the tone of a teacher. You were paying retail prices for wholesale goods. I knew I could do better. She pointed to a column. These calls. I've been renegotiating your contracts. I told them I was the new business manager for The Haven. I used industry data to leverage better rates. The shipment I was talking about last night was a pallet of new candles from a vendor in Vermont. I got them for 40% less than you paid your previous supplier. The circled phrases in her notebook, secure transport, package integrity confirmed, were logistics terms. The transfer wasn't a shady money drop. It was a payment clearing for the new website's payment processor. The entire conspiracy I had constructed was nothing more than the language of a world I didn't understand. She had been building an empire for me in secret. She used her skills not just to earn her keep, but to give me a future, to turn my struggling anchor into a ship ready to sail. And I had rewarded her by changing the locks, by accusing her, by looking at her gift and calling it a weapon. I looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time since the rainstorm. I saw the exhaustion etched under her eyes, but I also saw a fierce intelligence and a loyalty so profound it took my breath away. She hadn't just been hiding in my shop. She had been fortifying it from the inside out. I wanted to give it to you as a gift, she said quietly, finally looking up from the screen. Thank you. For the room. For everything. I wanted you to see that you didn't just save a person. You saved a partner. The shame was a physical weight, crushing my chest and stealing my breath. I had been so blinded by my own fear of failure, my own cynical view of the world, that I had misjudged the purest act of support I had ever received. The apology felt inadequate before I even spoke the words. I am so sorry, Diane. My voice was a choked whisper. I was wrong. I was so wrong. She closed the laptop, the blue light vanishing, plunging the counter back into the warm, dim light of the shop. She looked at me, her expression not triumphant or angry, but simply sad. "I understand why you were scared," she said. "I was a stranger who showed up in a storm. You had every right to be cautious." "No," I insisted, shaking my head. "It was more than that. I assumed the worst of you, because I've been conditioned to expect the worst. I saw your strength and your secrecy, and I turned it into something sinister. I didn't trust you. That's the truth. And there's no excuse for it." That was the moment the wall between us finally crumbled. Not the wall of suspicion, but the deeper walls of politeness and formal gratitude. She gave a small, weary nod, an acknowledgement. That night, we didn't retreat to our separate spaces. We sat at the small table by the window, the laptop open between us, and we talked for hours. She walked me through the website, the analytics, the marketing plan she had drafted in her notebook. I, in turn, told her about the soul of the shop, the stories behind the artisans I sourced from, the feeling I wanted every customer to have when they walked through the door. Our visions merged, her logistical genius and my curatorial eye. It was no longer my shop and her secret project. It became ours. The dynamic shifted from one of a savior and a survivor to one of equal partners, two architects drafting a new blueprint for a shared future. The next morning, the first thing I did was change the codes on the door and the safe. I made the new code a date, the day she had arrived in the rain. When I told her, a small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time in weeks. We spent the day working side by side, a new energy buzzing between us. We packed online orders together, laughing as we fumbled with the packing tape. We brainstormed new product lines. The formality was gone, replaced by the easy rhythm of a true partnership. The haven wasn't just a place to hide anymore. We were turning it into a fortress. The past arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon in a black town car that glided to the curb with silent, predatory grace. A man in an impeccably tailored suit got out. He wasn't large or physically imposing, but he radiated an aura of expensive, unshakable authority. He walked into the shop, the bell chiming incongruously, and his eyes scanned the space before landing on Diane. I saw every muscle in her body go rigid. The color drained from her face. "Diane," the man said. His voice was smooth, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Your family is very concerned. They've sent me to bring you home." "I'm not going back," she said, her own voice a thin, brittle thread. The man smiled, a reptilian twitch of the lips. "That isn't really a decision you're in a position to make. You're expected. Arrangements have been made." He placed a sleek leather portfolio on the counter. "This is a legal notice. Your family has filed a petition claiming you are not of sound mind to manage your own affairs. They are seeking conservatorship." It was a cage, not of steel, but of paper and legalese. A way to legally drag her back, to strip her of her autonomy, and force her into the life she had fled. This was the moment, the real test. My fear was a cold spike in my gut, but something else rose to meet it, a fierce, protective anger. This man, this family, they saw Diane as a problem to be managed, an asset to be moved. They didn't see the brilliant, resilient woman who had rebuilt my business from the inside out. I stepped forward, placing myself between Diane and the lawyer. "She's not going anywhere," I said, my voice steady. "She is the business manager of this establishment. And if her family wants to communicate with her, they can do so through our lawyer." The man's eyes flickered to me, dismissing me in a single glance. "And who might that be?" I didn't have one, but I looked him straight in the eye. "You'll be hearing from them." After he left, the portfolio sitting on the counter like a loaded threat, Diane's hands began to shake uncontrollably. "They'll ruin you, Christina," she whispered. "They'll bury you in legal fees. You have to let me go." "No," I said, putting my hand on her shoulder. "I'm not letting you go. This isn't just your fight anymore." I opened the cash box and took out the business checkbook, the one with a balance that was healthier than it had been in years, thanks to her. "This is our fight, and we're going to use our money to win it." It was the most terrifying and the most freeing decision I had ever made. I was no longer just protecting my little shop. I was defending my partner. The legal battle was a silent, grinding war waged through formal letters and court filings. It was expensive and exhausting, a constant drain on the profits we were just starting to build. Diane's family was relentless, but we were stubborn. We funneled the energy from our anxiety into the business. We worked from sunrise until long after the streetlights came on, fueled by coffee and a shared, unspoken resolve. We were building our defense and our future at the same time. The online store flourished. Diane's targeted social media campaigns drew in a new wave of customers, while my curation of unique, local products kept them coming back. The Haven became more than a shop. It was a brand, a community. We hosted workshops with local artists, started a book club, and turned the alleyway into a tiny, green oasis with potted plants and fairy lights. 6 months after the lawyer's visit, we won. Their petition was dismissed. The victory felt less like a celebration and more like a deep, collective exhale. That night, we didn't say much. We just shared a bottle of wine in the quiet shop, the silence comfortable, the shared relief a tangible presence in the room. The following spring, we signed the lease on a second location. It was a bigger space in a busier neighborhood, a move that felt both audacious and inevitable. The day we got the keys, we stood in the middle of the empty, echoing room. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibility. The sunlight streamed through the large front windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was overwhelming. The risk, the responsibility, the sheer scale of what we were building. I looked over at Diane, expecting to see the same anxiety mirrored in her face. Instead, she was smiling, a wide, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "We did this," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "You did this," I corrected. "You saw what this could be." "No," she said, turning to face me. "You opened the door. In the rain." We stood there for a long moment, the sounds of the city a distant hum. Then, she wrapped her arms around me in a fierce, sudden hug. It wasn't a gesture of pity or gratitude. It was a hug between equals, between partners, between soldiers who had fought a war together and come out the other side, stronger. We had taken my small, sinking island and built an archipelago. There are moments when time seems to fold in on itself. Standing behind the counter of our new store, watching Diane show a new employee how to use our inventory system, was one of them. The woman I was watching was not the hollow-eyed ghost who had stumbled in from the rain. This Diane stood tall, her voice clear and confident. She moved with a sense of purpose, a calm authority that came from knowing her own worth. She was a leader, a strategist, a force. I looked at our reflection in the polished glass of a display case. 2 women, side by side. We couldn't have been more different. My creativity was often messy and intuitive. Her logic was clean and structured. I dreamed, she built. But together, we had created something whole, something stronger than either of us could have been alone. A thought struck me like a lightning bolt of revelation. I had always told the story, to myself and to Diane, as one of me saving her. I had offered shelter, a job, a safe place. But that wasn't the whole truth. Before she arrived, I was stagnating. The Haven was my defiance, yes, but it was also my cage. I had poured so much of myself into its survival that I had forgotten how to grow. I was anchored, but I was also stuck. Diane hadn't just saved my business. She had saved me from the quiet resignation I was sinking into. She had forced me to confront my own fears, my prejudices, my limitations. Her ferocious will to build a new life for herself had reignited my own ambition. In giving her a haven, I had found my own way back to shore. The anchor of my shop hadn't been a weight holding me down. I realized it was never just mine. It was ours. It was a shared point of stability in a world that had tried to wash us both away. She had arrived looking for an anchor and, in the end, had become one for me. We were each other's ballast, keeping the other steady, no matter how rough the waters became. The reflection in the glass showed not one woman helping another, but 2 women holding each other up, their combined strength making them unsinkable. Years later, I found myself standing at the window of the original shop, watching the rain. It was a gentle, steady drizzle this time, washing the city streets clean, making the green of the trees in the park across the street seem impossibly vibrant. The shop was quiet, a peaceful hum of a place that was sure of its own existence. It no longer felt like my desperate act of defiance, but like the calm, sturdy heart of our small, growing enterprise. Diane came to stand beside me, placing a warm mug of tea in my hands. It was ginger, just like the first one she'd ever had here. It was a small, unspoken tradition between us on rainy days. "It looks different now," she said, her gaze following mine out the window. She was right. The world outside the glass was the same, but our view of it had fundamentally changed. The rain was no longer a threat, a force of chaos that could bring a desperate stranger to my door. It was just weather, a season, a reminder of the day our 2 separate storms had collided and merged into something new. It was the sound of our beginning. "Remember how scared I was?" I said quietly, looking at our reflection in the rain-streaked window. I remember how brave you were, she answered without hesitation. You opened the door. We leaned against the counter, shoulder to shoulder, a comfortable, familiar silence settling between us. We had been through so much, suspicion and reconciliation, threats and triumphs, the grueling work of building a life from scratch. Our friendship wasn't forged in easy laughter and shared secrets, but in the trenches of shared struggle. It was a bond tested by fire and flood, and it had proven stronger than anything life had thrown at us. The bell above the door chimed, and we both turned, a shared smile on our faces as a customer walked in, shaking off the rain. Our work was here. Our future was here. We weren't just the proprietors of the haven anymore. We were its guardians. We had built more than a business. We had built a life, a partnership, a family of two. Looking at her, my partner, my friend, I knew that no matter what storms came next, we would face them together. Our anchor was set, and it would hold.